Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons, or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as Mr. Most Days Off, and today we are kicking off Season 9 officially. We're doing it in style, and of course, bringing along with me, as always, your co-host with the most. It's Richie the Whiz Kid. How you doing today, Rich?
I want to come in with a song, but I don't know if I want to do New York by Sinatra or hear a little bit of The Entertainer again. There's just too many tunes going through my head here. So I guess...
Were you thinking about checking in with a song?
Oh, there's even that. So I don't know where to go here. I can't do this on my own. I'm so glad I have you to lead us through this, Miles. So I better go ahead and throw it back to you. The man, the myth, the Peter Pantless himself. It is Miles.
Maybe the most accurate throwback you've ever given me, actually.
I think it is.
Well, sir, today we have a lot to talk about, and first I'm going to address the elephant in the room. No, not that one. We'll wait for that. First, I'm going to talk about just a few minor changes that are going on with us, because... right off the bat, I'm just going to let everyone know that starting with Season 9, both Richie and my schedules have now changed pretty dramatically. And frankly, it's going to be a lot harder for us to find the time to do this, and we're going to have to make a few format changes to the show. So it might be a little bit more of a raw conversation than what we've had in the past. I'll still do the absolute best that I can to book some really cool guests when I'm able to, but simply put, our windows for opportunity have shrunken significantly, and a lot of what that change is going to happen is going to be the fact that I'm going to do less editing. So it's going to be, like I said, a more raw conversation.
No wrestling fans, hush, not that kind of raw.
What a great episode to start with, because not only are we making that change, but this episode had 2 commentary tracks to reference. So I've got lots of fun with that. And in the first show that we're going live with no edits, I'm going to spend the next hour just trying really hard not to make bad 9/11 jokes.
Oh.
And there's the other elephant in the room. This episode does heavily feature the World Trade Center while it was still standing, as this was drawn, animated, produced, written. This episode was made in 1997. Specifically, it aired on September 21st, 1997. Approximately, honestly, just 10 days off of being, 4 years before the terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center on September 11th.
Absolutely, yeah, and it definitely can make you feel weird at parts, and I know we'll get into all the details of how it went off syndication, then it came back on, and then, of course, the other really, really interesting, eerie fact about the episode, which that's a tease for later, a live tease for later. But, yeah, there's some intrigue behind this episode for sure.
We talked about that one you just teased on Toby, our friend Toby's podcast, the Secret Transmission podcast, when we did Simpsons conspiracy theories back in the day. But yeah, that'll come up organically, so we'll get there. Let's go ahead and start where we always do, right at the beginning. This episode did not have a chalk gag, and it had a couch gag where the Simpsons came in as the Harlem Globetrotters. Super appropriate for an episode about New York City.
Yeah, but I like that one a little bit. I mean, anytime you get that little whistling noise, it's always good.
I mentioned that this one had 2 commentary tracks, and I'll also say that, like a lot of the transition episodes, meaning like the first few episodes of the season, this one was still under the guidance and leadership of Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who were the showrunners at the time in season 7 and 8, and still at the time of this episode's production. They were both featured on the commentary, along with Jim Reardon, the director. Unfortunately, the writer, Ian Maxstone Graham, was actually on vacation when they recorded that commentary track, but he wanted to talk about this episode so much that he actually did a separate commentary track for this episode, along with Dan Castellaneta. So
nice.
I've got 2 separate commentary tracks that I'll be referencing throughout the episode.
I actually had a note to ask if it was a holdover episode from Bill and Josh, because I saw their name popping up all over the episode.
Well, and I think a lot of it too. I mean, much like how we would continue to see Dave Merkin pop up, and obviously we even last season talked with Mike Reese, who came back and did a handful of episodes for the 7th and 8th season,
right?
Along with Al Jean.
Yeah, I have a note also that Merkin looked like he was still a consulting producer at the beginning, so it's like you don't ever truly leave.
No, I think it's like a fraternity to some extent. But we do kick this episode off officially at Moe's Tavern, where it's just about time to get the evening rush, Moe says. So he actually thuds the rats away with a broomstick, which is a good time.
There's a lot of them.
And that just... There's a ton of rats. Like, as many as you would actually expect to find in a city like New York, not Springfield.
That's funny.
But when the rats clear, we just see that it's Homer, Lenny, Carl, and the other barflies hanging out, and Barney actually walks in wearing a bathrobe and brushing his teeth, but he came in from the bathroom, and he greets Moe. Morning, Moe.
Yeah, all right. Listen up, guys. The Springfield police have told me that 91% of all traffic accidents are caused by you 6 guys.
They actually start celebrating, which is great. They're like cheering themselves on, like, yeah, we did it.
Yeah, I know. The bad news is we're gonna have to start using designated drivers.
Oh.
And
they decide that they're gonna pick the same way they choose the Pope, by drawing pickled eggs, and whoever draws the black one has to be the designated driver and stay sober that night.
As is tradition.
Yeah. The absolute traditional way that, well, honestly, that's no less ridiculous than any other Catholic beliefs.
Oh, shots fired early on this one, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it's fine. My opinions are pretty grounded there. Either way, of course, because how could it not be? It comes down to Barney, who draws the black egg, and he is absolutely mortified by this happening, essentially. And everybody else proceeds to get completely shit-faced, to the point that Homer is dancing around in his underwear, telling everybody that he's Peter Pantsless.
And again, that was Miles doing that, not Homer.
In the distance outside, you start to hear a thumping bass sound coming and approaching the bar. Yeah. And believe it or not, Rich, we're 9 seasons into this show, and this is the very first appearance of none other than Duffman. Oh, yeah!
I did believe that. I wrote that down, actually. In my note, I said, I can't believe that he appeared this early. I thought it was going to be a few more seasons, but... That's cool.
Really?
Yeah, for some reason I thought he was more of a mid-show character, but this is more like early third, which it's still the whole 9
I mean,
seasons.
we don't really know if it's the first third of the current
That's what I meant,
Simpsons.
yeah.
I mean, hell, it might not even be in the 10% by the time the Simpsons, AI bots take over.
Oh, no.
But it is Duffman, and he's here to party with the man that sent in,
10,000 Duff labels.
Yeah, there it is. It was a ridiculous amount. And that man...
Party down!
And unfortunately for Barney, it was him. He was the one that sent in all those labels, and tonight, he's the goddamn designated driver.
Oh.
What are the odds? What shit luck.
That's terrible.
I will say that the classic phrase that Duffman always says, the "oh yeah," actually comes from a band by the name of Yellow, who had that song. And at the time that they used it, The Simpsons said it was not popular at all. But in the, basically the rest of the decade and into the early 2000s, it seems like every beer company and, party, lifestyle commercial, anything that, wanted to promote the idea with their advertising that if you use their product, it would be an instant party. That became a staple song. So it seems like the Simpsons were overusing it if you just watch reruns, but they've claimed that they were on the forefront of people that use that song, which I believe them. I mean, honestly, that makes total sense.
I mean, the way they do the research, you gotta believe. You just gotta believe.
And how culturally relevant The Simpsons was at that time. People might have seen Duffman and been like, damn it, we should have thought of that. Budman. Oh, wait.
The new Spuds McKenzie.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, same exact concept. Exactly. Well, Duffman is trying to get Barney to actually, like, party down with him, and he's, like, encouraging him to chug and like, offering free beer, and Barney almost has a mental breakdown when he actually has to declare that he can't drink because he's the designated driver. And I absolutely love Hank Azaria's delivery of this line, because he gets very mundane for a moment. That's swell, but that's swell. Duff totally supports the designated driver program. Now, who wants to party?
Oh. Why couldn't Mo just call them a taxi?
Because that would fucking ruin the episode.
Oh, okay.
That's why. In the same way that wizards do things.
I want to do a really long explanation, but just drink. It's happening.
It's a lot of drinking. And to be fair to Barney, he does his duty as the designated driver. I did say duty. That did happen. I do love it's a super dated reference at this point, but at the time it was literally the most popular song in the world. On the way home, all of the barflies, along with Homer, are drunkenly singing and trying to dance to the Macarena, and like complete with like the arm motions where they're like basically poking Barney in the eye as he's trying to drive.
Please, I'm trying to drive.
Hey, let's go to the girls' college.
No, Playboy Mansion, Playboy Mansion.
It's my car, and I say we're going to the lost city of gold.
Oh, that's just drunk talk. Sweet, beautiful drunk talk.
Poor Barney. You can tell that he longs to be one of the drunks, wanting to go to one of the various drunken destinations.
Or just thinking that it's physically possible to make that trip in that night. Truly believing.
When it's finally time for Barney to drop off the last drunk, which was Homer. It's in Homer's car, actually, and he just tells him, Barney specifically, to return the car under the doormat tomorrow when he's done or whatever.
And then Homer opens the front door and collapses on the front inside porch, basically.
Yeah. We cut to 2 months later, and we see that now Homer is pitting up posters for his lost vehicle, last seen with this man, and it's a side-by-side image with Barney.
And it's funny because it's not that he's worried about where Barney's at, he just wants the car back.
Right, yeah, he's not worried about his friend at all. Mo is basically like, face it, Homer, the car's gone. Barney ain't ever coming back.
Here we are, Mr. Gumble.
And we see that Barney is actually pulled out of the trunk of a limousine.
Pre-hangover times.
Yeah, true. All I can remember about the last 2 months is giving a guest lecture at Villanova. Or maybe it was a street corner.
I ought to punch you in the nose, but I have to pick my kids up at school. Scoot.
So Homer's back at home, and he actually first he scoots off, which is really funny, and not in like the like automatic like lift scooters that are like populating all of downtowns everywhere, but like actually like more like just like a push scooter, like you would see a kid playing with. And later on in his garage, he's actually trying to build his own car, but it's mostly made out of a mattress and some tiki torches, it would seem.
Where did he get all the wheels from?
Other cars, maybe?
Yeah.
I honestly have no idea, but yeah.
He could,
by the time we catch up with him, he's already putting on the fourth time.
Yeah, like he could open up his own wheel shop.
Oh, he does also have to ask Marge if she can knit him some seatbelts.
Yeah, she tried to get on to him about something. He's like, aren't you supposed to be knitting some seatbelts? Sorry.
And just then, Lisa actually lets her father know that he's got a letter from the city of New York.
Pfft, throw it away. Nothing good has ever come out of New York City.
But Lisa does, in fact, ignore that request and opens the letter anyway. Dear motorist, your vehicle is illegally parked in the borough of Manhattan.
My vehicle!
If you do not remedy this malparkage within 72 hours, your car will be thrown into the East River at your expense.
But Homer does not want to go to New York. I couldn't imagine why.
Dad, you can't judge a place you've never been to.
It's about time I told you about a chapter of my life that I had hoped would be closed forever. I was on my way to the Harrisburg coat outlet to buy an irregular coat, but it required a stopover in New York City.
We see a flashback with a young Homer walking the streets of New York. Yeah, so this is basically it's not quite a montage, but it kind of serves the same purpose, and it is to that exact tune that Richie was just humming.
The Entertainer.
What's actually really interesting about it is that Jim Reardon actually directed this film sequence, or this animation sequence, I should say, to line up with the music itself, which is not usually something that they do. Usually, actually, the music would be added in post, but he specifically knew they were going with that song, and he thought it would be fun to kind of tie it in together. And basically, we just see over and over and over again Homer having things stolen from him in New York City. One of my favorite things, too, is while there's a billboard up in Times Square scrolling how crime is up 8 million%. But even like the police officer that he reports his crimes to robs him.
I like the part with a pimp who's chasing him when he's on a ladder that looks like he's climbing, but it's just going down a manhole. I love this whole sequence for what it's worth. Like, I think it's just awesome, and there's something about like that kind of style where there's no dialogue and it's just music playing while there's action going on. I know that I just described how a soundtrack works, but like when it's a little bit older, like The Entertainer, which conveniently enough was my grandfather's favorite song. But there's just something about it in that moment where I've always enjoyed this little scene of Homer in New York as a younger person.
And there are actually a couple of cameos in here as well. One of them is Woody Allen, who actually tosses trash out of his window, which ends up landing on Homer's face, which is actually how he ended up, he got the banana peel on his face, and he ends up throwing it over his shoulder, and he hits a pimp that looks a lot like Sugar Bear, which was a character.
I thought his name was Huggy Bear.
Huggy Bear. It is Huggy Bear. So the Sugar Bear is from Pops or from the cereal or whatever. Huggy Bear. You were 100% correct. And then
Sugar
also,
Bear.
While the pimp is chasing Homer, there's actually a car that drives in the background, and the driver of that car is drawn to look like Simpsons director Bob Anderson, who didn't direct this episode, but he's been around the show for a long time.
Oh, just sneak somebody in like that.
I think they do that fairly frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Homer basically says all this to say that New York sucks and he doesn't want to go there.
But Bart offers to pay because the bus tickets are only $9.
That's true. He finds out that the Greyhound tickets would only cost $9 to get the entire family there, which is both ridiculous and not that far off. But also, riding a Greyhound like that is a miserable experience.
Would know I was never brave enough to try that.
So, and this point too, when they declared that they're going to New York, Homer's mad and he's like, "Lousy Bart with all his money. All right, New York, I'm coming back, but you're not getting this." So he takes his wallet, and to prevent New York from getting it, he throws it in the fire.
Dad, our baby pictures were in there.
Don't you start.
But to be fair, he lost his wallet in his flashback, so, I mean...
He must have obviously gotten a new wallet in the last however many years.
Yeah, but I'm saying he knows what's going to happen in New York. He's just preventively keeping his wallet from being taken. Good man, Homer.
For sure. That actually brings us to the end of our first act, and before we dive into Act 2, I will just briefly say that Bill Oakley actually visited New York as a kid when he was approximately 7 years old, and then Josh Weinstein and him went together in their 20s. They actually lived there for about a year in 1989 to 90, so right around the time the show is actually just kicking off. And they said that it was definitely on the mend there. It was starting to, be built back into what we more know New York to be today. But there was definitely, lingerings of, how shitty it had really gotten in the late 80s.
Ooh. We're just taking a crap on New York. It's a heavy fan base for the Best Darn Diddly review show.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, if you live in New York, I'm not saying New York is a shitty, I would love to live in New York. I think that'd be great. I could never afford it. But at the same time, if you live there, I've been there. It smells like piss, dude. There are literal rats everywhere, and, a lot of the things they depicted in this episode really do happen. If you ride the subway, you will have con artists, and probably some legit homeless people trying to get money from you.
And rats that are raising turtles that will be ninjas after they're mutants.
I mean, there are upsides. So, we see the Simpsons family on their way to New York City. They're all napping on the Greyhound, and I really like that... I'm sorry, Bart actually complains at one point that it's taking too long, and he's like, how did we have to transfer in Atlanta twice?
I say we should have paid the extra $1.50 and gotten a bus with restrooms.
But when Homer wakes up, he starts to freak out a bit. He's laying out and he has a blanket over his lap, and he's been sitting long enough that he can't feel his legs. And he actually starts to punch himself in the thighs, trying to regain feeling. And it's there that we see that it's not actually his legs. We see an appearance of the very tall man that was featured in 22 short films about Springfield, the one that basically punks out Nelson at the end.
It's
and
that
he's
boy
so tall,
that laughs at everyone.
Yeah. He's so tall that his legs are actually coming up underneath Homer's seat and taking his place.
I didn't remember him being in that episode, but I did make a note there to be like, it's the tall dude whose name I don't know.
He has a name, in all honesty. Yeah.
I don't think he does.
So, I do have a favorite joke in this episode, but there's also a string of jokes that I really, really appreciate. So I'm going to mention them kind of collectively now. But throughout this entire episode, Marge is just absolutely fascinated with the most mundane parts of New York, which is really, really funny to me. For one, she gets really excited about the Williamsburg Bridge, which is basically not a thing. It's just a bridge. There's not any iconic architecture to it. Nobody goes there as sightseeing. It literally just goes over some creek or alley or something. She also mentions 4th Avenue, which New York has a famous 5th Avenue, but 4th Avenue is basically a alley. And Governor's Island, which actually apparently now, or even at the time of the commentary, which would have been recorded in approximately 2007, now it's more of a sight to see. They've got a park there and whatnot, but at the time it was literally just a rock in the middle of the water. There's nothing at all to be even remotely excited about.
Hey, she'd be a fun person to go on a trip.
She gets excited about the little
things.
More fun. Enjoys the journey, not the destination. I like it. Before we talk about Bart seeing ZZ Top, which is exciting, actually, since I just said that it was recorded in 2007, it reminded me, fun fact for the new DVD, because I did change out from Season 8 to Season 9, obviously. That's how DVDs work. When I turned on the DVD, I was greeted with some rough animations from the new movie coming out this summer, the Simpsons movie, Richie.
Well, that's awesome, though, that they had it on the DVD as well. It takes me back. That was over 10 years ago at this point. 12 now. Holy crap, we're old.
But yeah, so that was kind of fun just with the movie. But back to the episode, like I mentioned, we actually see Bart get excited because he thinks he sees the group ZZ Top. ZZ Top, excuse me. But it's actually just two, what is it? Hasidic Jews?
Rabbis.
Yeah.
They're rabbis.
Well, either way, they're dressed fully in, rabbi garb. And whenever Bart yells out, "You guys rock!"
Maybe a little.
When they get off the bus at New York City's Greyhound Depot, Homer reminds them, "Now remember, criminals prey on small-town folk like us, so if anybody asked, we're sophisticated millionaires from the Ozarks."
Homer, you're scaring the children.
Good. I don't want to spend one extra second in this urban death maze. You stay here at the bus station while I pick up the car.
The bus station is just one of the sights we came to see. We'll meet you at Central Park at 5 o'clock.
Again, I love that the bus station was on Marge's sightseeing list. Oh, man. So this is actually where we see the World Trade Center for the very first time, because Homer is following the address to go and pick up his car, and it's at One World Trade Plaza, and sure enough, parked directly in between the Twin Towers is the familiar pink sedan that we're all used to seeing.
What a clash of weirdness and coolness and just a whole bunch of crazy feelings when you see these scenes.
It is a little weird, and they talk about it a lot on the commentary, how this episode is odd to rewatch now for a lot of obvious reasons. But I think we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the episode, and for the sake of doing this review, I think we need to kind of put ourselves back in 1997. Because obviously, I mean, I guess to be fair, the Simpsons are often accused of predicting the future, but I think any sane person is not going to think that they had any idea that planes were going to crash into those towers and cause them to go crumbling to the ground. I mean, that's just not something that anybody could have predicted.
Right. If I read correctly, I think it was just more of the way they were using the scene was it just looked like a perfect spot where you could put a car.
Well, and, there's so much comedy to be had, that we're going to get with Homer having to, for instance, run all the way to the top of one tower only to find the restroom out of order, so he has to run all the way back through. We're going to get to a scene where they're arguing amongst themselves, which actually, that's the one that both Bill and Josh agreed was, the most regrettable scene that when they watch it back. But again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end. I have a few other facts to talk about. But for right now, it's 1997, and this was before that tragic day. And Homer is standing between the two towers, and his car is completely littered with parking violations.
And of course he screams, "Ah!"
And then notices a sign that there's a $50 fine for screaming.
Ooh, ah.
So from here, we're going to get a little bit of cutbacks and forth between the rest of the family touring and sightseeing and Homer having to stand guard by his car because he's given a range of time that the traffic guy will be by. It's got a boot on it, and he needs to get it removed. And there's it's worse than your cable company or any service you have to have in your home. He has to be there between 5 a.m. and 7 p.m. or something crazy.
I think it was 9 to 5 is what it said.
It's a long ass wait.
Yep, and I think it's right at 9 o'clock when he's there. So that means he's going to be there all day.
We see Marge and the kids are actually in the Statue of Liberty looking out at the view. They see boats going by, and I love the line, "Wow, Governor's Island looks so insignificant from up here." Which, again, it absolutely was insignificant. And freaking Bart.
Oh, my gosh.
"Hey, immigrants! Country's full! Beat it!"
And it looks like the Statue of Liberty is saying that because he's yelling that from the top of the statue. So then the sailor on the boat with the immigrant says, "Okay, people, you heard the lady. Back into the hole. We'll try Canada."
Along with being pre-9/11, this was before we had a completely fucking racist president. So, again, another joke that just doesn't quite hold up the same as it used to.
Yeah.
Back at the car, we see Homer is completely pissed off about this boot situation, and he's doing everything he can possibly do to try to get the boot off his car himself, including using his teeth. My goodness.
He's unbreakable. It's okay.
That's fair. This might be proof to that theory. But there's actually a great sequence here with Dan Castellaneta, basically murmuring as he's got, a mouthful of metal. And he actually slips in a fairly obvious string of swears in here that made it through the censors, which is really funny when I tell you what the censors didn't allow through later. But if you listen closely, you'll make out a few words that usually would not make it into a Simpsons episode under the guise of being a kind of string of incoherent groans. And like I said, Dan Castellaneta was on this commentary, and he absolutely confirmed. He's like, oh yeah, I said it.
What did he say?
I think he's like son of a bitch was what I was able to make out.
Okay, I've never caught that before in that episode. That's very interesting.
And it's arguably maybe a little bit harder. Like it's kind of a fuck sounding, but like I definitely heard a son of a bitch.
Huh. I'm gonna think about that the next time I watch this.
Yeah, give it a go. So while Homer's trying to handle this situation by hand and teeth, this is actually where we get the scene that I mentioned is what the creators now consider the most regrettable of the scenes, which is really tragic because it's a really funny scene. If you think of it in the context, again, back in 1997, it's absolutely hilarious because one of the guys from one of the towers is actually leaning out and yelling at Homer, "Hey, when you're done with that, I've got something up here you can bite off."
Hey, why don't you be polite, you stinking puss bag?
And this is actually a guy leaning out of the second tower. So you have two guys now, one in each tower, both one yelling at Homer, one yelling at the first guy.
Pal, you gotta call the number on the boot. Sorry about that, guy. They stick all the jerks in Tower 1.
That's it, I'm coming over there. And you actually see them continue to yell at each other until a third guy up higher yells out to, "Shut up to the both of yous!"
Yeah, so this is where Homer gets pointed out the very obvious fact that there's a number on the boot that he calls.
Right. And the Simpsons are actually very proud, the creators of the Simpsons are very proud that they actually got, like, the famous lady that does that voice, like, that you always hear, like, the operator voice. That's actually her in this episode.
That's why they had, like, everything I was looking at for this episode really wanted to point out that there was a guest star voice on this one. And I was like, why are they making this quick little segment so like noticeable? That's why. Okay, that makes so much more sense.
We get the classic voice saying, "Thank you for calling the Parking Violations Bureau. To plea
not guilty,
press 1 now."
Boop.
"Thank you. Your plea has been
rejected.
You will be assessed the full fine plus a small
large lateness fee.
Please wait by your vehicle between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. for parking officer Steve
Grabowski."
I don't know why it's so funny with like the gruff New York officer's voice coming into the very pleasant like operator voice.
And the fact that they must all be named Steve because it just makes them do the last name.
Right. And that is again where Homer is super pissed off that he's going to have to sit there for so long, and he's actually trying to do the math. How many hours is that? He's looking at his watch. 10, 11, denominator, where's Lisa when you need her? But Lisa is out sightseeing with Marge and Bart still, and they're actually on the subway where Lisa's having a conversation, which seems to be local there, we'll call him.
Here's a better idea. You give me your address and I'll write to you.
Okay, send it to Jesus, care of the Pentagon. And he's very clearly like a crazy homeless dude.
Aww.
I have to talk about the signs in the background of the subway train here. There's a lot of really, really funny ones. There's one that says, cash for teeth.
Oof.
Another one that offers a service where you can trade food stamps for lottery tickets. And then my absolute favorite, it's a sign that says, "Can you throw a football? Become a New York Jet today."
Oh, still true to this day.
I thought that was hilarious, and I'm not even that big of a football fan. I just like the trash talk.
There's a lot of good like background signs in this episode. We didn't mention it earlier, but when Homer was doing his flashback sequence, all the posters and signs behind him when he was younger in New York were all like porn titles, and the one that made me laugh a lot was The Godfather's Parts 2.
That is funny.
There's a lot of funny signs in this one.
So Bart and Marge and Lisa are on their way, and Bart is actually trying to become one of these scammy people we were talking about on the subways earlier. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people who just find themselves on hard times and feel like the subway is a good opportunity to see a lot of people and possibly get some money from. But also, there's a lot of tourists on subways, and unfortunately, with the way the world works, especially today, there's a lot of people that try to run scams, and that's just sadly the truth. And Bart becomes one of these people. He actually claims that he needs money because he lost his sense of taste in an accident, and to prove it, he licks one of the poles of the subway train, which you can tell he immediately regrets.
I think he even said something like he doesn't have it in him that even New York's besting him in this situation.
I really like the juxtaposition here because in the next sequence we see Homer, who is kind of getting frustrated, just sitting down on the concrete next to his locked up car, and without any effort on his part at all, people assume he's homeless and start tossing him change. At first he's kind of like, "Oh no, I don't. That's not for me. No, I don't need. Okay, if you insist.
I'm not a bum."
And it finally gets to a point where a woman walks by that doesn't leave anything, and he actually gets mad at her.
Spare change, lady?
Lousy cheapskate.
But yeah, that's a very clever little set there where Bart's trying hard and doing nothing, and Homer doesn't even realize what he's doing and getting the money.
Just falls right in his lap, literally.
Yeah.
Homer actually realizes that he's collected enough change that he could afford to buy a slice of pizza, and lo and behold, he looks across the street and he sees Famous Ray's Pizza, but there's a other sign that it says no, not that Ray, or not to be confused with Original Ray's or whatever. This is actually a joke based on reality because in New York City, there actually is a very famous Ray's pizza place that a lot of people like to go to. It got so popular that people started making knockoffs of it, and they'd, if it was actually Pizza Ray's or whatever, it'd be Ray's Pizza or Famous Ray's, and if you go to New York, there are just dozens of various plays on Ray's Pizza, all trying to basically confuse people in hopes that they'll accidentally call an order from them instead of the original one that everybody really loves.
Right.
It reminds me of that joke in The Office where it's you want Alfredo's pizza or pizza by Alfredo?
Yeah. One of them's really bad. We just don't remember which one.
One of them is you can have a lot of really bad pizza, or the other one you can have a little bit of really good pizza. Which honestly is fairly accurate. I know a lot of people get CC's and stuff, or Little Caesars for holiday parties and whatnot, and it's just oh, I can have as much as I want, but my intestines
I don't want much.
But unfortunately, even with all that cash, Homer decides, well, first of all, I think it's funny that he seems to think that he has to keep physical contact with the car.
Yeah.
And he's thinks he's getting closer somehow.
I remember being really, really in love with the scene as a kid, especially when he picks up the stick. That he thought that's actually going to help. It seems really dumb in this day and age, but I remember absolutely loving this bit as a kid.
The only saving grace for Homer's appetite is that there are a lot of food carts in New York, and one happens to be coming by right now, but it's not pizza. It's actually a foreign man pushing a trolley yelling out, "Claw Kalash."
What? Well, can I go across the road and buy a pizza while you wash my car?
He just gets
by
mad.
Wash, I mean watch.
Yeah, he just gets mad and keeps screaming, "Claw Kalash!" That's what I have. Homer doesn't really seem to like it, but he does literally lick it down to the stick, which, for what it's worth, it's like meat on a stick.
Yeah, but it's funny because he bites a piece of it, and he's just like, ew, and then it flashes forward in time, and he's licked it clean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he even says that's just awful at some point. But as he finishes it, he realizes he needs something to wash down that awful taste, and the vendor has Mountain Dew or crab juice.
Blech! Ew! Sheesh! I'll take a crab juice.
And that is my favorite joke in the episode. I'm legit drinking a Mountain Dew as we speak. That shit cracks me up every single time. What a dig at the great fine people over there at Mountain Dew.
Sponsor our show.
Really should. Between Diet Coke and Diet Mountain Dew, who are probably different companies. Yeah, Mountain Dew's Pepsi. We're going to have a rivalry on our hands. Say what, if...
The bidding starts at...
if Pepsi sponsors us, Richie will quit drinking Diet Coke forever. And if Coke sponsors us, I will quit drinking Mountain Dew forever.
These terms are only legally binding to Mr. Most Days Off and actually have nothing to do with the Whiz Kid.
But you would do it.
I would not do the deal.
If somebody were to offer you a huge amount of money to
wild cherry
Pepsi,
Coke,
you would do it.
It'd have to be wild cherry Pepsi.
You could literally drink any non-Coke product. It would just be like you would have to give up Coke specifically. You could do it.
I guess you see more in me than I do in this moment, but I am drinking a Diet Dr. Pepper at the moment, so.
Yeah, you would do it.
That's because I finished my Diet Coke already.
That's fair. We get some
Back to crab juice.
We get some more shots of the kids along with Marge shopping, and Marge is like, "Are we still in Little Italy?"
Actually, I think we're in Chinatown now.
Only in New York. Oh, this is... Honestly, I don't really like this next scene. It has nothing to do with, like, animal cruelty. I 100% understand as a meat eater, like, the sausage has to be made and all that good stuff. But it's just because I feel like Lisa's, like, a little too dumb here. And I know that she's supposed to be an 8-year-old girl, and that's always, like, at the end of the day, her character. But as they pass by a Chinese restaurant, they have clearly dead, like, rabbits hanging in the window, and Lisa is mortified. Mom, those rabbits aren't dead, are they?
No, Lisa, they're just sleeping. Upside down. And inside out.
Like, it's a funny joke, but again, I feel like Lisa, it doesn't quite fit that. Like, she would clearly know that's what an inside out rabbit looks like, and rabbits don't live when they're inside out.
But sometimes when your parents tell you something to protect you, you believe them.
Well, and also I think they just needed the joke. Or wanted the joke.
Oh, okay. That's how television works?
I do like, though, while they're having this conversation, you can clearly see, like, Bart just kind of nonchalantly slips away in the background, which is really fun, because in the next scene we see that he's actually across the street buying fireworks from a vendor right there on the curb. Which is funny because that's not how, like, they don't sell fireworks on the curb in Chinatown. Like, that's just not a thing. You have to go into the shop and ask to see the illegal fireworks that they keep in the back.
Celebrate the freedom of your land by blowing up a piece of it.
Yeah, but, like, legit, like, you can get illegal fireworks in New York pretty easily, but nobody's gonna, like, set up a, like, shop on the front of the street. But once again, makes for a really funny joke, because when Marge screams to put down the fireworks, Bart does obey, but apparently lights them on fire, and it ends up causing the entire stand to go up in flames.
Oh no, Chinese fire drill! Serious this time!
Back at the World Trade Center, we see Homer is still waiting with his car, but he's also got, like, a huge stack of crab juice cans piling up around him.
He got a lot of change.
He must have, yeah. And right about the time that urge to go to the bathroom hits, a lot of other things start happening that kind of, like, cause him to be motivated to go. Like, for instance, a bus sign reads Flushing Meadows. And that leads him into a fantasy where he's, like, literally dancing around like a magical world of toilets.
Or chocolate. Or bed pillows and beds.
But back at, like, reality, outside of his fantasy, we actually see that Homer legit cannot take it anymore, and he's told that there is a restroom on the observation deck of the tower. So we get a fun sequence where Homer is running up the stairs, trying to push his way into an elevator, going all the way to the top, peeking out of windows to see that his car is, still, the officer hasn't come by, only to find himself all the way up top to a sign that says, "Out of order."
Use restroom in other tower.
Yeah. So all the way back down, we see him run across the street. We repeat that sequence. And this is actually what I found to be really funny, because there's a really great, like, read here, a sound effect, really, from Dan Castellaneta, who just has the, like, perfect noise. Like, everybody's been there where you have to pee so bad, and when you finally are able to let it go, it's, like, literally like like a sensation that's just, like, overwhelming relief. Well, Dan nailed that, but in the original cut, they actually had the sound of both his zipper being unzipped and the pee stream, just, a sound of water, essentially. And the censors demanded that both of those sounds were removed for basically being inappropriate for television.
Fox, the standard of television etiquette.
And it was literally just the sound effects. Like, there was nothing else other than, like, zip, psss,
But, I mean, hey, if they're going to go to war over P sound, I guess that's the time to go.
I guess so.
You see what I did there?
Nice.
What I want to point out as we're closing out the second act here is, I don't know if it's just this particular episode or if it's the start of something new here, even though it's still the same showrunners for this episode at least. But I feel like the animation in this episode is much more cartoonish, particularly Homer, where he has a bunch of over-exaggerated animation sequences from the way his body is moving. And, like, at first I was like, oh, it's season 9, so it's a new staff or new showrunner. And then I was like, nope, Josh and Bill's name are all over this episode. So I don't know if something conscious was made to do this, but to me it just seems like Homer is very over-exaggerated with everything he's doing in this episode. And it's almost like he has different limbs that are moving, whereas in the past it might be, his knee might not bend that way, or he may not run like a Looney Tune character, but he almost had that kind of feel in this episode.
Interesting. I do have some notes on the animation, but it has nothing to do with, like, that type of animation. It's a lot more to do with the background.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I want to pay attention to that as we go forward here and see if there's any kind of overhaul maybe on changes in the animation.
Yeah, we should definitely keep our eyes open, but there was nothing at least specifically mentioned on either of the commentaries that I listened to for this episode. But
fair enough. Never mind.
Unfortunately, Homer's relief is almost immediately cut off when he glances out of the observation deck window and notices that the parking officer is writing him another ticket, and he has once again missed his opportunity to get the boot removed for the day. We get a dough that seems to ring out all around New York City, much like in Home Alone 2, when, you get the Kevin, and it rings out everywhere. But that brings
pissed away his opportunity.
Nice. That actually does bring us to the end of our second act, and when we open up for Act 3, we see that Homer has returned to his car to find another $250 ticket for failing to meet with the officer.
Yeah. Oh, man. So you called the number, you called the guy out here for nothing, and that cost you $250. Woo!
Yeah, it's a steep ticket, especially back then, if you think about it. That's even worse.
Yep.
That's 22 years removed at this point.
Well, we have a lot of terrible stories about parking fees at places like that. But yes.
Accurate. So Homer, though, realizes that the $250 ticket is actually the least of his worries at this point, because he is in New York City, a place that he is absolutely terrified of, and it's getting dark out. And as you recall earlier, he even said that, they need to be out of there before dark because that's when the weirdos go crazy.
And to be fair, if you leave New York City without paying any of the parking tickets and you never go back to New York City, there's nothing the city can do, right?
I don't know. It seems like they might be angry about all the streets that he's about to tear up as well, because Homer's solution to this problem is to just jump in his car and drive off with the boot on it anyway, which not only just completely wrecks up his quarter panel, but it also, puts a trench in... It's the plot of Cars. Holy shit, this is where Cars came from, where Lightning McQueen accidentally, tears up their paved road, and then is, basically court-ordered to fix it.
I have never seen Cars.
You've never seen Cars?
I think I've seen, the last 10 minutes of it.
Interesting. I like that movie.
I'm not a car person, so it didn't do a whole lot to excite me. And I almost just said Steve McQueen when you said Lightning McQueen. So There we go.
The sequels are awful, but the first one is definitely worth a watch.
Maybe it was the second one where I saw the end, where he was hurt and he came back to win some race. I don't know, but I was just like, eh.
In the first one, he has to learn that sometimes you've got to slow down in order to go fast. It doesn't make sense, but it's fun.
That's completely against Ricky Bobby standards.
Also, you got to turn right to go left. I just spoiled the shit out of that movie. Enjoy.
You can turn right 3 times to make a left.
I legit do like cars for what it's worth. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. In this case, it's Homer tearing up the streets of New York City.
They stole it from The Simpsons, damn it.
He's on his way to Central Park, where again they agreed to meet at 5 o'clock.
Oh, it's so awful watching him drive with that boot on.
Well, and like New Yorkers are getting like angrier and angrier, like swearing, honking, and cursing at him.
I mean, it's not making the city any worse than it was before, right?
It's just giving the rats a place to sleep at night.
Oh.
So we cut back one last time to the rest of the Simpsons family shopping. I do like this line by Lisa. Oh, wow, look at all those beautiful shoes. I mean, I know they're made from animals, but wow.
If only I didn't already have a pair of shoes.
I like that line too. Again, Marge is like a queen in every possible way. In this case, she's like the antithesis of a lot of people who are like, I need a dozen of this color or, style. And she owns the one pair, so she's good.
But I like Bart. Speaking of shoes, I don't care about shoes. I'll meet you ladies back here in half an hour.
Yeah.
And then Lisa doesn't even realize it. Okay, Dad.
Oh, yeah, because she's so enamored. But Marge is just like, stay where I can see you.
And he immediately doesn't listen to that.
Nope. He immediately finds himself at the offices of Mad Magazine, where he's kind of sad to find that the secretary is like, it's pretty boring in there. And I mentioned earlier that Bill Oakley actually visited the city as a child, and him and Josh Weinstein together went in their 20s. And in both instances, they actually visited the Mad offices because they're huge, huge fans of the magazine. And they did want to specify that it was an absolute delightful experience both times we went, because that was like kind of
awesome.
like the mecca for comedy writing and such a huge influence on both of them. And so they had a really awesome time. They got to meet with some of the animators and writers, and just like he said, both as a kid and as an adult, they made him feel special and welcome, and highly recommended it.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I thought so too.
I like how Bart wants the grand tour because his father has a subscription.
Yeah.
So he automatically gets the grand tour.
Listen, kid, you probably think lots of crazy stuff goes on in there, but this is just a place of business.
Oh, okay.
But as Bart's walking out the door, we actually see Alfred E. Newman, which if you're not familiar, he's the face of Mad Magazine, the little redheaded freckled kid. And he kind of cracks the door open and yells out, "Get me Kaputnik and Phone Bone. I want to see their drawings for New Kids on the Belch." And in the background, you can see that there's Spy vs. Spy, and there's like a lot of just like mad staples, a lot of the like cartoons, and it's an absolute madhouse craze, and it's something that a kid would absolutely love. But Alfred is just interested in getting his first Schluggen pastrami sandwiches.
Wow, I'll never wash these eyes again.
I guess remember to wash your eyes at home? I don't know.
Well, remember at one point he said, I'll never wash this hand again.
I do
so
remember
he's
that.
not doing a lot of washing now.
So Homer is still driving like a maniac, flinging all sorts of asphalt and rocks and everything else that he drives over, causing lots of both damage and traffic. But he actually plays a like delightful song called "Everything Is Beautiful," and he doesn't even seem to notice, which makes the New Yorkers even more mad.
Well, I think the music makes Homer even more angry.
Yeah, that's what
everything
it is,
is not beautiful.
Yeah, he's like, this doesn't fit at all. And speaking of musicals, somehow all of this before 5 o'clock, Marge and the kids are going to catch a Broadway musical, Kicking It, a musical journey through the Betty Ford Center.
You know, when I was a little girl, I always dreamed of being in a Broadway audience.
And again, Marge with just the lowest expectations ever. Absolutely wonderful. But what you probably did not expect to see in this episode of The Simpsons is Iron Man the prequel in the form of a musical.
Are you saying that's RDJ in there?
I am saying that this whole story is about the Betty Ford Center, which is a known rehabilitation for drug and alcohol abuse. And the man depicted in this musical is drawn very much to look like Robert Downey Jr., who was very publicly going through a lot of addiction issues at this time. It's kind of crazy, actually, that this is approximately a decade before Iron Man came out, and as we've talked about off-air many times, and many Marvel nerds have as well, but it's funny how Tony Stark's journey in Iron Man very much, like, paralleled Robert Downey Jr.'s in real life.
I remember a few years before the Iron Man movie came out where they went through a big storyline of him having a, terrible drinking problem, and yeah, it was almost just like a perfect pairing, so to speak. That's the kind of actor that can definitely use experience for that, but that's a good thing, and he definitely turned it in a way that is very profitable for all involved.
And he did all that to make the ultimate sacrifice.
Oh, he is Iron Man.
Yeah, totally 3000. So we open up on this courtroom setting of this musical with a judge. How do you find the defendant?
He's guilty of mayhem, exposure, indecent.
Freaked out behavior, both chronic and recent.
Drinking and driving, narcotics possession.
And that's just page 1 of his 10-page confession.
I should put you away where you can't kill or maim us, but this is LA and you're rich and famous.
And then we get the backdrop swings down to reveal they're now at the Betty Ford Center, and they all start singing, I'm checking in.
He's checking in.
I'm checking in.
Checking in.
No more pills or alcohol. No more pot or Demerol. No more stinking fun at all. I'm checking in.
He's checking in. He's checking in.
No more looking pale and thin. No more bugs beneath your skin.
Hey, that's just my aspirin.
As the interns take his medicine away. Chuck it out, 'cause you're checking in.
Check it in.
So we cut to the audience, and you can see that the kids are all enjoying, and Marge are all enjoying the show. Bart even declares, when I grow up, I want to be in the Betty Ford Center.
You better start saving now. It's very expensive.
Shh, they're strapping down Liza Minnelli.
Did you also notice the lady behind Marge was having the typical audience behind Marge moment where she was trying to look around her hair and couldn't see over the top of her head?
I missed that. That's so good.
I feel like there's a lot of jokes in this episode that are throwbacks or callbacks to really old Simpson jokes from earlier seasons.
Interesting. Just trying to reset everything and kind of keep it going. That makes sense.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's Bill and Josh too, so they do a lot of inside Easter egg type things.
Well, we cut back to Homer, who has a great idea and a classic conversation with his brain once again. He actually sees a construction site complete with somebody that's got, what are those called?
Jackhammer?
A jackhammer, thank you. Aha! I've got it! Brain, how can I ever thank you?
Just don't bump me on your way out of the car.
And of course, smack! Doe! Sorry. That's all he wanted.
Yeah.
So Homer has this construction worker with the jackhammer, and he has to think of a way to get him away. So he tells him that the boss says he's fired.
I'll get him.
So Homer decides to jackhammer off the boot on his car, which does technically work, but only after he breaks his windshield, pokes holes in the hood, deploys the airbags, and puts a hole in the radiator.
But he gets the boot off.
He does get the boot off, and then in typical frustration mode, Homer just goes at it for a little bit more, just totally destroying the thing.
That's not typical. That's just human nature
That's true.
right there.
If you get, it's like Office Space when they wanted to destroy that copier, and like everybody who's ever had a problem with an electronic wanting to give it the old baseball bat treatment.
If you're telling me someone gave you a jackhammer for free and you could take out your frustration with it on a little boot, you wouldn't do it?
No,
I think it'd feel pretty good.
100%, yeah. It doesn't end there for Homer, though, because he actually ends up, like, snapping the boot on his foot, and that causes him to...
After he says, Homer won, New York, nothing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And it causes even more problems as he, like, hits his car, and, like, everybody at this point is, like, backing up behind him and are getting super, super pissed, but he's just like, oh, thank you guys so much for your patience, and he's completely sincere about it until a bullet barely misses him and hits a street sign right by his head.
Woo!
Yeah. Marge, Bart, and Lisa are ending their relaxing day in New York with a horse ride, or a carriage ride, I should say, a horse-drawn carriage ride through Central Park. But Homer comes running up to them, or driving up to them like an absolute madman, running over picnics and driving through basketball games. And he gets side by side with the carriage. And isn't it Ben-Hur, the movie they're referencing, where it's like the chariot races?
Yes.
And because Homer fucked his car up so badly, he even has like, it looks like he's got like the metal like hooks on his wheels that are kind of like causing sparks with the carriage.
He is the crazy that he warned his family about in New York after the lights go down.
Even the other driver of the carriage is like, my God, that maniac is headed right for us. Go, Secretariat, go. Bart's excited, though. He's like, wow, Dad's right on time.
Yeah, just so nonchalant of it. We're getting out of here now. Jump in, Marge. Trust me. Throw the kids. No time for the baby.
2 out of 3 ain't bad, I guess.
Well, he knows she'll make it fine.
She'll apparate wherever she needs to go.
There you go.
Marge refuses and will not leave the baby. She, for some reason, feels that's not a good idea. So Homer takes action and actually cuts off the horse and carriage to make him stop, and he piles them all into the back seat before taking off again, leaving the carriage driver behind.
And I like the animation from the animation point that like the entire family minus Homer gets in the back seat, like even Marge, because it's very rushed. Like it would have been weird if she was like magically in the front seat all of a sudden.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. And I do like it. They really do a good job of treating this like a great action sequence, like as silly as it is.
Right.
Yeah. So we actually literally see the Simpsons driving off into the sunset over the Brooklyn Bridge, tearing up the road and pissing people off all the way back into as we fade from view.
Well, first they have to kick out the carriage driver because he. Oh
yeah, that's true. And Lisa points out, "What a magical city! Can we come back next year, Dad?"
We'll see, honey.
And there's garbage sailing through his broken... more and more garbage coming through the windshield.
There's a sanitation truck in front of them, and there's like a bag of biohazard needles flashing on his face and banana peels.
And instead of the usual Simpsons theme, we actually leave on the song New York, New York, as the family drives away.
Hey, always a good one. We're not going to sing that one.
So that brings us to the end of the episode. The state of New York versus Homer Simpson, which I just realized I don't think I actually ever said at the top of the show, but that's the episode we just reviewed. So welcome to this podcast.
Yay!
Richie, I know there's one thing you teased a little bit earlier we're going to talk about. Is there anything else that you want to say, or that book of yours wants to say about this episode?
Well, I read that David Silverman was actually sent to New York City to use photography skills to take pictures of pictures all over New York, and they actually took pictures of the spot between the two towers. And like from what I read, because I've never been before 9/11, I was never in New York where I could actually go to the two towers, and apparently they tried to get it as close as possible, but when they saw that spot, they were like, this is the spot where Homer's car will be parked. But I thought it was cool they sent David Silverman out there to take pictures just so they could try to find a good spot for that. And then I know we're about to talk about it, but yeah, this predicting 9/11 thing that the Simpsons kind of possibly did here. Why don't you lead us into that one there, Miles?
So First of all, I'm just gonna say this is completely bogus. Like, I don't endorse this. I love conspiracy theories. I love reading about them. I wish more of them were true. This one is honestly a stretch at best, and even in things that like The Simpsons has predicted, it's still a stretch at best, I would say. But in the scene where we basically find out that bus tickets are only $9, it shows $9 written with the number 9, and it's directly next to a picture of the Twin Towers. So it forms basically 9/11. And again, this was approximately, almost 4 years to the day, like within just about 10 days off. So within, a couple weeks of being 4 years away from the events of 9/11, which did occur. I will say I actually did visit New York in the late 90s. I was there for Christmas one year. My mom worked she was like at a temp agency and ended up working at the airlines, and we got free tickets out there. So we're like, cool. So I got to spend Christmas in New York in the late 90s, and this is going to sound super shitty, but like I was like, I don't know, I was probably like 12, and truth be told, again, I was much more like Bart, and like the World Trade Center meant nothing to me. Like, I totally don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Like, looking at it in hindsight, it's like, wow, I can't believe
two generic buildings,
right? But like at this point, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I was fortunate enough to get to visit that site before it happened. But like at that time, it was just like, cool. There are two buildings that match. Who the fuck cares? They do business here. I'd rather go to Mad Magazine.
Yeah, well, that's the way I felt when I first saw this episode, because I obviously have seen the World Trade Center buildings like in skyline views of New York City and whatnot, but like before this episode aired in 1997, you're just like, oh, that's just kind of a weird spot to put Homer, kind of, I guess.
Yeah,
okay.
You see the comedic value of being like two matching buildings. But yeah, and again, that's I'm not trying to be disrespectful in any way, but my 12-year-old self, if I'm being honest, really did not appreciate the value of visiting that site. And I think, to be fair, a lot of us would probably say pre 9/11, the World Trade Center isn't at the top of the New York City, like, visitors sites. Like, people would rank, like, the Statue of Liberty and even the Empire State Building before the World Trade Center at that time, if they were being honest with themselves.
Yeah, that's anybody who's not being honest about that. That's I call BS on that.
Right.
But yes, since then, obviously, very sought after area, ground zero to go check out.
Yeah, and especially if you live in New York, or New York is extra meaningful. I totally understand why that's such a significant site. And obviously, it was a tragedy, and I'm so sad that we lost so many people that day, and such a just insane. I mean, it's everyone always says it, but I absolutely will never forget where I was when I first learned about like the towers falling, and it was It was like right when I woke up in the morning, and my parents were like, "Turn on the news, turn on the news," and I was like, "Why the fuck would I turn on the news? I don't watch the news." But like when you see
what the heck, man, I was in like second or third period when the news started leaking.
Dude, I watched it like live as like the second I watched the second tower get hit live.
Wow.
Yeah, because they didn't actually have at the time. There wasn't actually footage of the first tower because people weren't expecting it. But then once there was a big fire in the first building, there was actually cameras rolling. So the second plane was actually caught live on TV, and I watched that happen. But yeah, then throughout the day, we watched a lot of those things, and that kind of brings me back around to where I think we're going to end today. You had mentioned David Silverman went and visited to get, photos. Well, the animators actually went out there together to visit New York City. And when the events of 9/11 occurred, I think it affected all Americans for sure. Probably a lot of people around the world as well. Just because anytime a tragedy like that occurs, regardless of where it happens on the planet, like if you are human, you have empathy for your fellow humans. So in this case, though, the animation department of The Simpsons was actually specifically shook quite a bit more than I mean, everybody was shook, but they were shook even harder because of how much detail and time and effort they spent into getting that right. Because in the drawings that we see, in the, like we were talking about the animation earlier, this is what I was going to mention. They took a lot of effort to make sure that they got everything correct. Now, there were certain things like they tweak signs and whatnot, but even with like the balconies across the street and like the awnings that stick out, like they would make sure they had the right colors of the building. They made sure they had the skyline correct. So like they spent so much time there really focusing on every single detail. And then when they're watching that happen on the news that day and they're seeing all those things that they spent so much time and effort recreating just in covered in ash or burning to the ground or not there at all, it specifically affected them very greatly. And I think that's a lot of the reasons that they may look back and use words like regrettable when this episode occurred. I have to say I agree with the writer of this episode, Ian Maxtone Graham, where I think the really regrettable thing in a lot of, I mean, obviously there's a major regrettable thing that it happened at all, but I think specifically for this episode, the regrettable thing is this is such a good episode, and they put so much time and effort into making great jokes and a great story, and it's one of those fun episodes where the Simpsons travel, which are usually a lot of fun. And, you know, now anytime anybody watches this, they're obviously going to be reminded of a tragedy instead of a comedy. And you mentioned it earlier, too. There was a long time where this episode was completely removed from syndication. It went off the air entirely.
I think it was 5 years.
And then they slowly started it. They would put it in overseas, and now it's been fully restored that it plays in all markets, even in New York. But I can't imagine, you know, that if you see that episode come on, the closer you were to that site on that day, the more emotionally heavy it's going to be. And I know that's a heavy way to end it, but this is a heavy event that occurred and directly affects this episode. So what a hell of a way to kick off season 9, Richie.
Yeah. The last thing I'll throw in there is that I read that when Bill and Josh individually were asked about the brochure bit with Bart and Lisa, that even they were like, oh man, that's just kind of eerie. We don't really have an explanation for that. And Bill seemed a little more like, I don't really care, but it is eerie. And I don't mean he didn't care about the tragedy, just
it just didn't think that like the
conspiracy behind the episode.
Yeah.
But he said it. But he even eventually was like, it is kind of weird and eerie.
That's fair.
But I thought it was interesting that they didn't have an explanation, because usually they just kind of write it all off. But in that one, they're just like, no, that's just weird.
Well, as weird as it may be, that is going to do it for this week's Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Before we get out of here, make sure you follow Richie the Whiz Kid at @TheWhiz_Kid23. I'm at Mr. Most Days Off.
And our show is at Best Darn Diddly. That's DIDDLY.
Make sure you come back again next week, where, by some people's metrics, we are going to be reviewing the episode that killed The Simpsons. Now, that's their words, not mine. But join us next week for our review of The Principal and the Pauper.
Oh no, it's getting dark. That's it, I'm getting out of this podcast alive if it kills me.
And until next time, be cromulent to each other.